I sacrificed myself for my sister for years, but when I needed her the most, she refused to help me. My sister had only one person to trust from a very young age, and that person was me. We come from a broken family, with a father who was present only until I was 5 years old and another trapped in a cycle of addiction. Due to our situation, I had to grow up quickly and protect her from everything I could. She was aware of what was happening, but I tried to keep her away from danger. I started stealing from our mother to make sure we had food and that the bills were paid. I got a part-time job at 13 because we couldn't depend on our mother. When I graduated, I immediately got 2 jobs and we moved out. I had to support my sister during high school, which wasn't easy. At the same time, I struggled to make ends meet to cover our bills at 19. Finally, she graduated after being held back a year. She changed her attitude a lot, started working, and had her own place by the age of 21. I finally had the opportunity to do something for myself and pursue a college career. As a result, I got a much better job. Unfortunately, this happened right before the pandemic hit, and I went from being hired to being laid off because I was a new employee. Now, the reason I'm sharing all this is not to congratulate myself, but to explain why my reaction is what it is. I found myself without a job on the verge of losing my apartment and only had one person I hoped I could turn to, my sister. At this point, she had recently gotten married and was living with her husband, so I asked if I could stay with her for a few weeks or, at most, a few months until I found a new job. Her response was a resounding no. I was shocked, but 1 or 2 weeks later, I was evicted from my apartment and asked again, receiving the same response. At this point, I was homeless. The only reason I didn't end up sleeping on the street was because I could stay with some friends temporarily. I rented a room with several roommates for a while. Eventually, I got a job in my field again, and now I'm fine. However, I haven't spoken to my sister since then. She has called, sent messages, knocked on my door, left crying voicemails, apologized dozens of times, tried to explain herself, tried to find me at work, reached out to my friends, done everything possible to communicate. She claims that her husband refused to let me stay, and even he contacted me to plead with me to reconnect. For me, the one time I needed her, she basically told me to fend for myself. I just feel like it was the final push I needed to close that chapter of my life. I feel bad, but just not bad enough, I guess. Even my friends and girlfriend are urging me to forgive her. Initially, they understood, but now they think I'm being an idiot. What would you do? Update. So I had a huge number of people asking me what ended up happening and requesting an update should anything happen. While I wasn't sure if I would or even should, I eventually decided to just go ahead and do it. Let me start by apologizing to the people who commented on my post. I made my post and it didn't seem to gain much traction, so I more or less stopped looking at it for about a day, only to realize the next day that I had received a lot of comments. Unfortunately, when I decided to reply to a lot of the comments I had been reading, I realized that this subreddit locks the comments after a certain number of comments have been made or karma has been reached. I'm afraid I wasn't aware of this admittedly very odd rule, so that's on me. I ended up reading most of the comments and would like to thank everyone who offered advice or just said something supportive. First, to answer a couple of questions that I was unable to answer along with addressing some incorrect comments in the previous post that I saw asked quite a few times. 1. The first few no's were without a reasonable explanation. I was not aware of her given reason that her husband was not okay with it until later. 2. She did not know she was pregnant when she declined, and most of this happened before she would have even been pregnant. Most of this took place over a year ago, as I mentioned in the post, so I'm not sure how that math would even work. 3. I am not an anti-vaxxer or dirty or anything like that. There were quite a few comments that theorized this would be the reason for her refusal. I got my 2 vaccination shots as soon as I could, and while my personal hygiene is not exactly anyone's business, I shower once a day, and my apartment is spotless. 4. A lot of advice and comments seem to come from the perspective of functional families with a functional family structure. That is not the case here. The primary reason I am so devastated by this situation is exactly that. This isn't a case of, well, I don't want my cousin to stay in my house. He can stay somewhere else. This is a case of me having sacrificed my entire youth and a significant portion of my early adult life for someone that I played no part in creating or have any parental responsibility for. The first and only time I ever asked her to do something for me as the only person I could reasonably fall back on, she didn't do it. That's more than a familial spat. It is a straight-up betrayal. That's also an answer to the people saying that she owes me nothing because I chose to be a parent. Anyway, with that out of the way, I decided to follow some advice given by several people. I told my girlfriend and the friends who involved themselves or were involved by my sister to back off or to lose my number. They do not understand my perspective, and they likely never will, and I need to get that through my head as I have a tendency to talk about my life as if it is standard, but it is a standard only to me. Luckily, most people don't go through any of that. I obviously had a longer, face-to-face conversation with my girlfriend and with individual close friends, but it boils down to that. One friend kept pestering me about it, and I ended up dropping him as a friend, but my girlfriend was apologetic, and most friends were either apologetic or said they'd drop it. I ended up writing a long email to my sister, and while I will not copy and paste the entire thing here as it contains a lot of personal information and far more horrible stuff that I am unsure will even be allowed on a sub like this, it more or less boiled down to me explaining to her how her refusal to take me in for what ended up being a few weeks made me feel, and I detailed a long list of things I had done to take care of her. I ended my email by telling her that even if I take her version of the story as truth and her husband is the cause of me not being allowed to stay, that it is entirely irrelevant to me because that just means she didn't fight for me at all. I also informed her that I have no interest in meeting her child at this moment, and I have no interest in reconnecting with her. If that changes in the future, I will be the one to contact her. I told her to let this be a lesson to her, as it has been a painful lesson to me. In summary, I have decided to move on and keep the door open just a tiny crack. She has responded a lot since that moment. She seems unable to accept it, but I have not responded since. I don't have anything else to tell you, I'm afraid, and since the sub only allows one update, well, it is what it is. Again, thank you all for taking the time to respond to my post, and thank you for your insightful replies.